안녕하세요. 저는 Ciro입니다. And this is all the Korean I know. So I'm going to switch to English. So welcome to my talk. Today I'm going to talk about how to blend gameplay and storytelling using timeline. And I'm also going to talk about all the improvements that we've had in the latest version of timeline. So first, I will give a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about, just to give you an idea. I will be covering the much-awaited feature called markers and signals, and how to create a custom one. And then I will cover very quickly some improvements that we have on the animator track offset, on the audio tracks, and on the nesting of control tracks. And all of these I want to show in the context of a small mobile game which I created. So let's start with markers and signals. I want to specify here that this is the feature that many have been calling timeline events. But because we already have different types of events in Unity, we decided to give it a more unique name to avoid confusion. That's why they're called markers and signals. So what are markers? Markers are basically the same thing that they are in similar software for video editing, like Premiere or After Effects, and so on. They give you the ability to mark an instant on the timeline. And they are different from clips, because clips represent a continuous segment in time, right? Something which has a start, a duration, and an ending. While markers, on the other hand, they are instantaneous. So for markers, it only exists like before and after. So these are markers. And then we have signals. And signals are just a custom type of marker. So exactly like for clips, with markers, you can create your own custom types. And with timeline, we provide one custom type, which is called signals. So this is a custom type of marker. And signals, they provide the functionality of events for the timeline. And because we wanted to separate timeline from the actual object that holds the code that you want to call, the signals, they require three parts to work. One is called the signal emitter, and it's something that goes on the timeline. And it looks like that. And it's the one that emits the notification. Then we have the signal asset, which is basically the channel through which the notification travels. So each marker, each signal can emit a notification on a certain channel. And finally, you attach a component called signal receiver to any game objects. And you specify which signal they're listening to, so which signal they're listening to, and what to do as a reaction. And of course, here you can specify as many reactions as you want. So three parts, 1, 2, 3. So let me give you an example directly in the editor. Oops. So this is a small mobile game I made. It looks, it's kind of like a clone of Clash Royale, if you want. It's called Unity Royale. I'm going to play the game for a second. So you can see this intro animation, and then I can start playing the game by playing my cards. So this is gameplay, right? Now I'm playing. I can play my cards. And then in time, if I win the match, I'm gonna spam my units. You see this final animation, right? So we have an intro, the gameplay, and then an exit animation. So we have some kind of storytelling, gameplay, storytelling again. So how did I do this? If I go here on the timeline, I have 3 timelines, 1 for the intro, and 2 for the 2 destruction of the 2 towers. So let me take a look at the intro one. You see it does this. And then here I have the first signal, which is this one here. And this signal here broadcasts. I want to show you the properties. You see, it broadcasts on start match, the second step, right, the channel. And you see he has a few options. He has the time, where the signal is. Retroactive means if the timeline starts playing from after the signal, whether the signal is played or not. Emit once, of course, if the timeline loops, if it's gonna play only once. And then you have the actual channel, start match. I have other channels here. So start match, you see it's an asset contained here. This is step 2, right? And as you can see, signals, they're nothing else than a scriptable object with no options. They're just a name, if you want. And then the step 3, the third part, is here. Here, this game object, timeline signal relayer, it has this component, signal receiver. And as you can see, this one defines the actions. So this one is, for example, the one that I've just shown you. Start match, then you call this function on the game manager. So again, step 1, the signal on the timeline. Step 2, the channel. Step 3, the object that receives the signal, okay? There's a lot of separation. Other examples here are in the destruction of the tower. Here I have a signal at the beginning of the timeline, which broadcasts on camera shake, and this sends a signal to Cinemachine to produce like a shake on the camera, so that when the destruction happens, the camera also shakes, right? And here I have another one at the end, which broadcasts on game over. So this will tell the game that everything is finished, and then you can show the UI for the game over. And the best thing with signals, of course, is that if an artist, if a designer wants to make this timeline longer, they can just do it by dragging this signal here and extending the clip, and then everything will still work, and this part here provides the connection with the gameplay. So that's why you blend storytelling and gameplay together. I'm gonna undo, I hope. Yes. Okay. So this is a very simple example of signals. Now, signals can be placed in, let me go back to presenter view. They can be placed in 3 different places. You can put them on a special track on the timeline itself, the number 1 you see there, which is that very thin line, the one called markers. You can put them on a dedicated signals track, or you can put them on any track that has a binding. Who knows what's a binding or a bound object? It's these ones. Main camera, king red, king blue. They are bound objects for each track. So this one is an object bound to this animation track. If a track has a bound object, then you can put a signal on it. And each one of these three options has its own advantages. Normally, it depends on who is receiving the signal. So in the first case, the object that receives the signal is the timeline itself. So everything is kind of self-contained. The second case is the most flexible, because you can connect any object to here. So any object can receive this signal. The third case is constrained to the object that's bound here. You cannot change that, right? But it's good if you want to keep the signals and the clips together, because maybe you want to move them together on your timeline. So 3 options, whatever works best for you. Okay, so these are signals, oops, a type of custom marker that we provide for you. But like many things in Unity, you can also create your own types of markers. Just exactly like clips and tracks, you can create your own custom clips and tracks. You can also create your custom markers. So let's see how. So to create a very simple custom marker that doesn't do much, you really only need one script, and it's the one that defines the marker. And as you can see, inherits from the marker class. But if you want your marker to actually do something, like the signals, and trigger some code, then you need 2 scripts. One inherits from marker and implements iNotification, and it's the one that goes on the timeline. And the other one implements from monoBehavior, so it's a component, and implements iNotification receiver. So it's the one that receives the callback. And again, let's see a concrete example in the editor. To exit slideshow. In my case, I used custom markers here on my intro timeline. So in my game, I have some AI that can move the units on the battlefield. Whenever I play a card as the player, or the AI plays a card, the units are automatically moved and will move to their target, play a walking animation. Then when they reach their target, they will play an attack animation and so on. So there's a lot of animation that plays when that happens. So I had this idea, and I thought, can I use that AI for my timelines? And I do that with these custom markers. So you can see they have a different shape from the regular one. And these custom markers, well, this is a regular one, right? This is a signal. And this is my custom one. These custom markers represent a card being played. And as such, they only have the data that I care about. You see? Time, when it's played, and then 3 things. The card that's played, in this case, Cinematic Warriors. The position where it's played on the battlefield, and the faction it belongs to. So if it's an opponent or if it's the player playing the card. You see, this is opponent, and this one here is the player. And that's why I want to show you the intro again. You will see that 2 warriors appear in the battlefield and they start walking. Now, player, and now opponent. And they just go for each other and attack each other exactly like as if it was gameplay. And then I can keep playing, and I don't notice this transition because the units I've seen in the cutscene are exactly the same as the ones that I'm playing. So that, for me, is a way to really blend gameplay and storytelling by leveraging in timeline a part of gameplay that is somewhere else in your game, and you put them together. So very quickly, if we go over the code, who's a programmer here? Okay, good number. If we go over the code very quickly, you can see how, sorry, actually, this one is my class, card marker, inherits from marker, and implements iNotification, as I said before. The only important part here is this one, the data that we care about, the data that the marker has to have. The card, which card, where on the battlefield, and which faction it belongs to. You remember? We saw it in the inspector. The other class, the component, I called it card player bridge. It inherits from mono behavior, and it implements iNotification receiver. And the important part here is this function here on notify, which gets called when this marker receives a notification from, when this component receives a notification from the marker. And the connection with the gameplay is here. So here is where I call the game manager, which is gameplay, and I call a function which is exactly the one that I would use if I was playing the card from the UI, if I was the player playing the card. So in this case, the marker just acts as a player. It just plays a card exactly like the player. And that's why then the timeline and the gameplay, they blend together perfectly. Okay, so we talked about markers and signals, which were the biggest news. And now let's see the other improvements directly into the editor. So in this case, I want to create a new timeline, just to give you a refresher of how to use timeline. To do that, I will just create a new asset, a new timeline asset. The asset gets created. I'm going to call it new intro. And if I drag it to the hierarchy, a new game object has been created with a playable director component ready to play. So now I can lock my timeline panel. So I make sure that whatever object I select, I'm still looking at this timeline. And now I can start creating. So first thing, I drag a warrior character to the scene, and I reposition it here. Then I want to start animating. So I select the warrior character and I drag it onto the timeline. And I create an animation track. And then I add a clip. Run. And now I have an animation clip here on the timeline. The warrior has moved to the center of the scene. And this is where one of the new improvements from timeline kicks in. So if I select the track now, the animation track, this is one of the improvements. Now we have more control over where this clip is going to be played. So before, the final position was a weird combination of different parameters. And it was a bit complicated to use. So now we created 3 options. And 2 of them are the ones you want to use. And the third one, auto, is just given for backwards compatibility. So if you upgrade your project, you're going to be on auto. But don't use it. Try to use the other ones. So apply transform offsets allows me to specify a custom offset for this track, so I can place this object wherever I want. You see? When I stop the preview and I enable the preview, it snaps into the new position. And what I want to use is apply scene offsets. And scene offsets just respects the position of the object. So as you can see, if I unpreview, it just stays there. And that's what I want in this case. And don't forget that this is an option for the track, but you can also select the clips and apply an additional offset. So you can really offset each clip in a different way. Sometimes this is very useful for short films and animation, to reuse a clip in different places in the scene. Okay, so he's ready. I'm going to loop the animation a couple of times. So he plays the animation. Now I want to move him in space. So I want him to run from here to here. So I will add an override track. And I'm going to override the positions in the scene. So I'm going to press record. I'm going to go to 0, select the warrior, and here on the position, I will choose add key. And this adds a keyframe here on the timeline. Then I move to the end of my animation, and I move the character to here. And this will add another keyframe here. So now he plays the running animation and he runs forward. Cool. Then I can add another clip. Add from animation clip. And I can play this clip here. And you see he plays the attack animation. So he orders like the attack. And of course, the 2 clips here are snapping. The 2 positions are snapping into each other. And I don't want that. So I'm going to just go in and blend these clips together. And now they just blend into each other very nicely. Cool. Now I want to add some audio. So I'm going to create an audio track. And I'm going to connect the warrior to the binding of the track. Because the warrior has an audio source ready to emit sound. And here I have a little problem, because I want to emit this sound. Mocking. Oh, I forgot one thing. I need to create a camera first, sorry. So I'm going to create a new Cinemachine virtual camera. And I'm going to position it somewhere here, because I want the warrior to be in front of it. So I'm going to position the camera here, and then I select Game Object, Align with View. And now I bring the camera to the timeline, Cinemachine track, and connect the brain to the track. And now you see the camera is active here in the game view. And I can quickly also create another shot. So I take this camera and I duplicate it, and I go here. And I use the same trick. I want a game object align with view. Now I bring this camera here on the timeline, and I have another shot. Let's watch our cutscene. Okay, cool. And then I want another sound here. Like this one. Okay. Now, the thing I was mentioning before about the audio. The Warrior has an audio source here. But if I take a look at its parameter, here you will notice that the spatial blend is 0.75. And this is a little trick that I used. Now, you know that if a sound is 2D, it's not in space. It's just left or right. If it's 3D, it's positioned in the scene. And then it fades away depending on the distance from the listener. 0.75 is a mix between the two. It's not 2D, it's not 3D. And what I want to do here is a sound that, even if the character is very, very far away, will still play a little bit. So I still hear the sound. And that's good for gameplay, but in my cutscene, I want the sound to be fully 3D, because I want to hear the sound going from left to right as the character passes in front of the camera. So a new option of the timeline is now you're able to select an audio track, and here you have these controls. So as you can see now, you can modify volume, stereo pan, and spatial blend for each track. And now here I can put 1. And as you can see, this gives me an overview of the final value of the spatial blend, which is now 1, because it comes from 0.75 from the audio source, and then the track is adding to it. So it brings it to 1. And now you can't really hear it, because here we don't have like 2 speakers. But if we take a look at the audio mixer, you should be able to see that the sound goes like from left to right. So if I press play,
attack!
Again, you don't hear it, but trust me.
Attack!
Okay, so we have this little cutscene. So again, improvements on the position on the track, and improvements to the audio. And then the last thing I want to show you is how to nest timelines into each other. So I made this little animation, and I want to actually reuse part of the intro in this animation. So what I do is I just drag the intro timeline in here, and Unity automatically understands that I want a control track, which is a track, as you can see, without a binding. But this control track has a clip which allows me to control another timeline. You see here, source game object. So now this timeline will take control on the other timeline and play it at the same time. And the cool thing now is that I can, inside this timeline, in my new intro, I can double click, and I can go inside the old intro and check it out. And I can decide where to cut here. I want to use this timeline from here. So then you see here I have breadcrumbs, and I can go back, and the playhead will be exactly at the same time. So now I can just reduce this clip. bring it back here. And now my two timelines will work together.
Attack!
And if I double click on the control track again, you can see that now timeline shows me exactly the amount of that animation that I'm using. So then I can also see here the timing as global or local. So this is very useful if you have a lot of timelines and you put them into each other and you reuse them several times. And now I can press play, and you will see my new intro,
Attack!
the old intro, the custom markers, and then finally the final signal which starts the gameplay. So now the game has actually started. And everything, I wanna lower the volume, everything still works as before. I've used my new timeline inside my old timeline inside the new timeline, and everything works like before. So now I'm playing the game, and I can lose. No. You get the final UI screen, and I can watch the intro, the new intro again. Right? It was super easy. So if I made you curious about timeline and what it can do to help you blend gameplay and storytelling, I suggest you take a look at these links. Today I've shown you how to create a custom marker, but with these links, they focus a bit more on custom tracks and clips. The first one is kind of like an inspiration blog post, and then the third one is another blog post where I go into detail and show you the actual code that you need to create custom tracks and clips. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. This is all from me. 감사합니다.